Good morning, everyone, and nice to see the Beis Medrash full and to be able to give a share again. I tried. We're going to focus on the sugya of Tiltul and HaTzad, and based on the feedback, I tried just to keep for now the sources as Gemara Ashitosis, and I'm going to try and outline in today's share the main topics that we'll focus on, and then give the Maram Komis after that, so that people can sort of hopefully more easily draw out from the sources the Nakudas, the points that I'm hoping to pull out. So the Gemara suggests another solution to the Hatzalah of the mace, and it's clear that the best solution is being metaltel when there's something else on a kikkar or whatever. However, then the Gemara says that there's another solution, which is when there's not available a kikkar or tinuk. The Gemara says the other solution is Tiltul min HaTzad, and this depends on the machlokas whether Tiltul min HaTzad shmei hezek or lo shmei hezek, whether Tiltul, something about another, whether Tiltul shmei Tiltul or lo shmei Tiltul, whether Tiltul min HaTzad is called Tiltul or not. If it's not considered Tiltul, then one would be able to move al yedei davar acher, whereas if it is considered Tiltul, then one wouldn't be able to do so. We looked before the break at Shittas Rashi. We learned that Tiltul min HaTzad was another way of saying kilach hayad, type of shinoi with respect to or Tiltul b'guthoi, which is a different topic. We're not focusing on that now. We're going on the shitta of all the other Rishonim, more or less. We learned that Tiltul min HaTzad is another way of saying Tiltul al yedei davar acher, and that's the machlokas that the sukkah is dealing with. So I just really want to cheshbon out the sukkah based on that mahalach, and then try and understand how it plays out according to the view of Tosfos, which is the view of the majority of Rishonim. So the Gemara says, Lema katanoi. The Gemara wants to stress that this is really a machlokas tanaim. Ein matzinin asameis mipnei ataleika. You're not allowed to save a mace because of a fire, or in the situation of fire. Rabbi Zobin Lakish, Shemati shematzinin asameis mipnei ataleika. And the Gemara suggests that this is that really the machlokas going on is Tiltul min HaTzad, shmei Tiltul, or lao shmei Tiltul. That's the stress from the Gemara. Now, the first order I just want to say is that the Gemara, if the machlokas is indeed about Tiltul min HaTzad, then it seems clear in the statement of the Gemara of the Brisa that Tiltul min HaTzad would only be a heter because of the need of that solar of the mace from the deleika. So that's the first order to say. Now, the Gemara suggests that Tiltul min HaTzad, the machlokas is Tiltul min HaTzad, and the whole scenario where Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish is willing to consider Tiltul min HaTzad is because it's Hatzalas Meis Mipnei Adleika, which would suggest that Tiltul min HaTzad is not l'chatchila, even according to the man Amar who is makel to allow Tiltul min HaTzad. It's not an ideal. It's not l'chatchila. It's only in a situation where there's a significant sorach. Yeah.
Is it clear that in the case of the fire, that it's actually Tiltul min HaTzad that is being marked? I thought that he's in the case of like if you're saying that there's Adam Bahul who might put out the fire.
That's the dichoy of the Gemara. So the Gemara pushes off and said, really, it's not Toila on Tiltul min HaTzad. It's because of Adam Bahul, and therefore we waive various halachas in order to avoid the situation of someone ending up doing a worse issa. But the havamin of the Gemara was that it was Toila on Tiltul min HaTzad, and the Gemara was willing to read the Brisa as being a machlokas if Tiltul min HaTzad is mutter or not. Now the Gemara is willing to say that the pshat in Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish is because of the hetz of Tiltul min HaTzad, and it thinks that's a reasonable reading of the Brisa. Now the Brisa is clearly exceptional circumstances of Deleika. Even before the dichoy of the Gemara, where the Gemara pushes off the link and says it's because of a unique rule of Adam Bahul, etc. It's certainly an unusual story. There's a fire going on and a mace about to be cremated. I mean, that's what's going on in the story. So you see that the Gemara thinks it's a reasonable reading in the sugya to say that the nidun is Tiltul min HaTzad or not. Now, I have to say this is not an ironclad proof, because it could be the reason we're talking about this extraordinary circumstance is because of the machmir. Even though it's extraordinary and you're being matzil a mace mipnei hadleika, nonetheless, you want to be matzah l'meis mipnei adleika. Nonetheless, the Tanna Kama holds that you can't do so. So you could say that's why the Gemara deals with the extraordinary story. But Rabbi Huda ben Lakish, who is mekel with Tiltul and HaTzad, would allow even under more casual circumstances. So it's not entirely clear, but it's interesting that we only have in this Havmin of the Gemara at least the Tiltul and HaTzad of Rabbi Huda ben Lakish. We only really see a heta in unusual circumstances, and it makes us think a little bit about to what degree Tiltul and HaTzad is mutter l'chatchila, or to what degree it's only mutter as under unusual circumstances. I mean, it's also mashman, and this is before in the Rishonim, that all of this is only in a situation where you don't have another solution. If you're able to move the mace through kikar or tinuk, that would be the better solution. So again, I'm just bringing this as Maramakim to question how far is the heta of Tiltul and HaTzad, which we'll think about when we try and actually look at the question we should start with, which is what is the heta of Tiltul and HaTzad? Why does it make sense to make a mutter? Yeah.
Also, just clarify, we were not sure when with the heta of kikar tinuk. Is that kikar tinuk on the bed and then moving the bed with the body of kikar tinuk, or is it has to be on the meat itself?
Okay, so I'm not going to go into the heta of kikar tinuk now because I want to focus on Tiltul and HaTzad. Other than to mention, I addressed this in a previous shiur, that maybe I didn't spell it out clear enough, because we were looking at what I asked a question really. The crowbar that we used in the previous sukkah to crack it open was, why do you need a tinuk or a kikar? Let the bed itself be the non-Muktza item which you're allowed to move. So there we looked at what's the heta of a non-Muktza item, how to help. I'm still moving the Muktza item, how to help. And we saw two svaras. Is it because the action is more relevant to the non-Muktza item, or is it only because it's actually using the mace as its sort of bosses type thing? There's a bit of a parallel story in the same way as the concept of bosses, that something that's sitting on something else, that if A sits on B, B is subsumed to A to make a Muktza, that's this of bosses. Maybe it's like a reverse svara, that the whole mace becomes toppled to the object on top of it. But that's a separate topic. For now, I'm focusing on just Tiltul and HaTzad. What is the heta of Tiltul and HaTzad? Translation of Tiltul and HaTzad, Tiltul are the date of Ache, not Tiltul Begufo, which is Rashi. The number one, what is the extent of the heta of Tiltul and HaTzad? According to the Mandama, who's Mekel, who allows it. Number two, we see that kikar tinuk, the heta of kikar tinuk is a better solution. And here in this Gemara, we can begin speculating that maybe it's only allowed under extraordinary circumstances. Something to think about, not ironclad proof, but something to speculate about. Yeah.
I may be repeating Joe's question, but I don't understand in the other mirror whether there's any indication that it should be Tiltul and HaTzad, because are we saying that it has to be that how we use that? Because the Matzid and Matzid is just saying you can and you can't. You can take up the body without any.
Again, the Gemara has a havamina that the best way to explain this machlokas is they're arguing about Tiltul and HaTzad, Shmei Tiltul or Lo Shmei. Is Tiltul and HaTzad a viable heta to allow you to move the mace?
I can have a havamina if there's no indication in the wording.
You're both worried by the same thing, which is it doesn't seem a great shot in the Mishnah. That's true, but whether we like it or not, the Gemara's first thought was that there's always a question: to what degree a havamina is a good havamina, and to what degree the Gemara is just spelling out a process of thinking. But either way, the Gemara contemplates more than contemplates, suggests as a possibility that the arguments in the prices about Tiltul and HaTzad or not. I'm not interested in here for now in defending that thought of the Gemara. But the fact is, the Gemara read the brisa and said, let's say this is the machlokas. So now we can speculate were there other problems with this suggestion or not. But the Gemara put that forward as a suggestion. And then the Gemara says, no, it's because of a unique heta of Adam Bahul, Al-Mesa, etc. But in the Havamina, the Gemara wanted to suggest that the reason had the Gemara stopped at that point, the reason for Rabbi Huda ben Lakish saying you can move the mace is because of Tiltul and HaTzad. That's what we would have said in that Havamina.
Which Tiltul and HaTzad are we talking about? Are we talking about the one with the bed or the one with the kicker or either?
Kicker is a different heta. The heta of Tiltul and HaTzad is according to Tosfos and 90% of the Rishonim, is Tiltul on the day of Acher. Because I'm not directly moving the mace, I'm only moving the mitar. That's called an indirect movement, and that's okay. Rashi learns it's because of Tiltul Begufo or Kilachayad and other heterim and so on. The heta of kikar tinuk is a different heta. It's because at the same time as moving the Muktza, I'm also moving a dover that's mutter, something that's mutter. This is when we began the sukkah. I said this is the real bread and butter of wrongly or rightly, and I'm still thinking about this. Maybe we started Muktza in the wrong sugya, and we should have gone not liking the order of the Gemara. We started the first sugya, significant sugya of Muktza, but we started with Vatal Kimechon, which is a bit of a side avenue into Muktza. But here we've now got to the one of the main, bread and butter sugyas of Muktza, and we've seen a heta of kikar otinot, that when I'm being metaltal Muktza at the same time as something else. And now we're looking at, and we've seen a heta of kilachiyad when we thought about Rashi, and now we're looking at the heta of Tiltul and HaTzad, which is another word, a way of saying indirect moving of Tiltul. This is negaya the whole time in Halacha. I have Muktza on my table. Can I brush it off with a brush? But not moving it directly. These are the really, really halacha l'maisa relevant shaylas in Muktza of moving things indirectly. And in our Gemara, it's just important to notice that we can speculate about what degree of tzorach allows Tiltul and HaTzad. How mutter is it?
Is it literally then this Tiltul and HaTzad in the Havamina was the bed thing? I mean, or any type of movement?
Yes, correct. So the Gemara's suggestion is that this mace is lying on a bed, and you're moving the bed. That's correct. Yes.
What, from bed to bed?
No, not rolling. That is sorry. I should have read that's well, it could be rolling, or maybe even moving more directly than that. We'll have to look at that also. But moving the mace through moving the bed. Yeah. Correct. And you're right. It's sosum in the bright. So when it said you can move the mace, it meant moving the bed as Tiltul and HaTzad. Yes. Correct. Yeah.
I think part of what we need to be able to solve this is something that maybe we haven't fully really got to the bottom right. I certainly came into it. I see most people thinking the Muktza was actually something there. It was a gather to stop you doing other aveiros, and that's the whole point. The Rabbanan had made this gezerah that you wouldn't do it. But actually, from what we've learned more, it seems, at least in part, it's more to do with it being this is an inherently non-Shabbostic activity almost. And I think that might make a difference here as to Tiltul. If it's a gezerah to stop you doing aveiros, then when the Rabbanan they made their gezerah, then they may well have said, unusual things, whether it's indirectly, whether it is more a Rashi way of any kalachayad. We're not going to put a gather for a gather, and we're just going to say you can't move it in a normal way, and you could move it in an abnormal way. If it's an inherently non-Shabbostic activity, then however you do it, it's still a non-Shabbostic activity, and that's problematic.
Okay, so again, one of the questions I was struggling with, and because this is the first time we've done as a group a massive sugya rather than more self-contained sugyas, is where we start, including whether to start looking at the sugyas of what the reason behind Muktza is. Now, believe it or not, and maybe this is a topic for sort of hashkafa or philosophy share, why Gemara is structured the way it is. There isn't really a clear sugya which says, okay, what's the reason for Muktza? And there's several possible reasons for Muktza, including a way of avoiding melachas. So, if you move pens around, you might end up writing, or maybe linked to the melacha of HaTzad uniquely. If you move objects around, you may carry them, and it's a particular gezerah HaTzad. Or it's missing the point. It's part of Shabbos. Shabbos is about being, not about doing. And therefore something which is muchen, but there's melachas. Obviously, Muktza is not a melacha. It's important to realize, not this melacha moving Muktza. But nonetheless, Shabbos freezes things that are muchen at the beginning of Shabbos are muchen for the use of Shabbos. Otherwise, they're set aside for Shabbos. Don't forget also that Muktza has a tzad deraisa to it, even though primarily it's a drabanon. And the Gemara in Beitzah learns that, Adam, I can't remember if your source sheet, your fantastic source sheet, by the way, this is the sukkahs in Beitzah also, or you did, you mentioned the Shaita. Okay, so the Gemara in Beitzah, which I assumed you referenced, talks about Muktza at really the first Mishnah, and it links it to the pasuk of the Hichinu Eisa She'ori, right? There's a pasuk in the Torah that when it talks about the mon, talks about having to make sure that the mon is prepared before Shabbos. Now, which preparation are we talking about? Are we talking about just merely bringing it home to your tent from the midbar? Are we talking about making sure it's Eisashe Tofu, etc.? Is it talking about a or bishul, or is it talking about some other form of hachana? Again, that's really a sugya. So there are a number of explanations, Muktza. One of the reasons not to start with the reasons, though, is to avoid the sort of thinking you're doing now, meaning we need to, as in so much of learning, what we need to do is try and understand first the facts of what the Gemara is saying, and then see what we can draw out of that in terms of the meaning behind it. Without, I want to get to this slowly, but the most basic thought in Tiltul min HaTzad, if Tiltul min HaTzad means al yedei daf ha'acher, is that I'm not directly connecting or relating to the objects. I'm not holding it, I'm not taking it, I'm not moving it. And therefore that's the basis of the allowance to do it. So irrespective of the reason of Muktza, if the essence of Muktza is, whatever the lonzus behind Muktza is, that the halachic workings of Muktza is that an object that's not prepared shouldn't be connected to in a certain way. I alluded to right at the end of last term before the break, a question about whether Muktza is only when I am, we said Muktza certainly is not touching Muktza, you're allowed to touch Muktza, you're not allowed to move Muktza. What about using Muktza without moving it? So for example, eating on a Muktza object or something like that, a Muktza table or the like. If I've got my laptop in there, can I eat on it? Can I use it as a table on Shabbos? Would that be Muktza? So these are deeper questions about how to relate to it. The real question of Tiltul min HaTzad will therefore be, is this a direct enough relationship to the Muktza to make it Osa or not? By the way, the words of Rashi, when Rashi has a very different explanation of Tiltul min HaTzad, where he says it's kelach hayad, also quite powerful words. Kelach hayad means like with the back of your hands. In other words, I'm not taking an object like this, I'm taking it like this. I'm not moving an object, grabbing it, I'm moving it with the back of my hand, kelach hayad, which is also sort of a revealing sort of terminology, because Muktza is taking hold of the object. If I'm moving it with the back of my hand, there's not a direct enough relationship to it. So these are certainly the svaras swirling around in the sugya, but for now we're just focusing on the specific heta of Tiltul min HaTzad and to what degree it's a generic heta. I'm just going back to your point. You just asked about whether we're talking here about moving it from bed to bed or moving one bed. It ties into again, maybe I messed up because I myself am struggling with the sugya and structuring these shiurim. But about a third of the way down, Tosfos, the part of Tosfos on top of Mem Daled Amud Aleph, I looked wrongly or rightly at that Tosfos, and we looked at shecheach, the issues of where you forget things and so on, and we touched a little bit on that issue of rolling from bed to bed. We'll get back to it again in brief, but for now we're just focusing on one fact, which is the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish allows you to move a mace on Shabbos to save it from a deleka using the heta of Tiltul min HaTzad. In other words, you're carrying the mace indirectly. Gemara is assuming a scenario of a dead body on a stretcher. You're moving the mitar, you're moving the stretcher, and therefore it's mutter. And I'm just pointing out that this is the case of deleka, which makes us wonder to what degree there's a heta of Tiltul min HaTzad. Yeah.
Okay. There are also degrees of Tiltul min HaTzad which are indirect. For example, where we had borah and we said that spooning was an extension of your hand.
Yeah.
So could it be that if there's something which is close enough to you, that's, even though it's not direct, that's not Tiltul min HaTzad?
Yes. I'm always very, very cautious about comparisons between different halachic topics. So just in the interest of due diligence, I'd say be very, very cautious about these sorts of comparisons. But yeah, there's definitely a sorrow that if you're using a knife and fork to move Muktza when you're eating something, it's something that's very much an extension. Maybe this heta wouldn't allow, as opposed to the mitar, which is its own choshev object, its own independent thing. It's not just an extension of your hand. Yes, but the basics are Tiltul min HaTzad will be I'm not directly engaging with the Muktza. Yeah.
Sorry, just regarding the point you made about the Halacha amendment.
Yes.
We're talking about Tiltul min HaTzad.
Yes.
You're suggesting that we might need to be careful about saying about generalizing, because we're talking very specifically about a serration here and the next.
Yes.
So with just two kind of questions on that. Firstly, just technically speaking, when the Gemara says "Alulav v'Tiltul min HaTzad," and just typically when the Gemara says that, I've always thought that meant we have a situation. When you say, are they arguing with regard to this machlokes? Are they arguing with regard with this shas machlokes? Like there is a general argument everywhere about Tiltul min HaTzad, and this would be an application of it. So then your point wouldn't we wouldn't take that point further. And as an example of that, the very first machlokes we had Rabbi Shua, which was talking about moving the Masechet of the sun. No one suggested there. The particular Tosfos didn't suggest that machlokes was limited to that case, which was certainly profit a mace. But Tosfos didn't start, for example, arguing against Shmuel and say, why does Shmuel only allow it in the case of profit a mace? There are all these other Shastavias for explanation.
Okay, excellent. So the first question, I'm going to push off because I'm not suggesting it's literally only a delay car, but something akin to that where there's a serious thing like a mace from in the sun, for example, in the Chama, where there's a serious lack of cover on a mace. The second point, though, is exactly what I was going to go on to, that at least in Tosfos, you see this as incorrect, and that the suggestion that you need some very significant tzorech is not correct, because Tosfos lines up all the sukkahs and shas and doesn't begin making these distinctions. And that was the second point I wanted to make, that that Tosfos at least doesn't think that this ha'ara is a correct ha'ara, and he doesn't descend into significant tzorech. The truth is, just to push this point a bit further, so I went through Tosfos with this in mind, considering the aspect of tzorech, and the only ones I could come up to that looked like relatively trivial tzorech was the case of near the end of Tosfos, actually, where he spoke about where he quoted the Gemara of exactly the knife case, yeah. Tosfos, I'm looking here already in the Tosfos of the part of Mem Daled on Medalef. He quoted the Gemara in the Common Daf Nun on the base, so about halfway through that part of Tosfos, where he talks about Sakina de Beina Orvir, which is a knife that's stuck into the wall, or Slikusta, which is some sort of flower or something, I'm not sure exactly what it was, which you pull out of the ground and stick back into the ground. So again, just for those who I can't emphasize enough, by the way, and this is I did not send out the Maran Gomez. We try and just learn the Gemara and the Rashi and the Tosfos inside out. I took the feedback seriously and like focus on really getting the cheshbon of the sukkah. But either way, Tosfos, and look up the Gemaras that Tosfos brings, because it's a bit of a shas sukkah this. So Tosfos brings a Gemara later on in our sixth stuff for the future, which talks about pulling a knife out of a wall. And as you pull the knife out of the wall, you dislodge the, out of brickwork, you dislodge and crumble some of the cement in the wall or something like that. That's scenario number one. And scenario number two is you're pulling a flower. It seems we're not talking about a melachot on Shabbat, so you're not plucking the flower from the ground for stopping it growing, sorry? And but on Shabbos, you have a flower which is stuck in the ground, and you want to put it out. It hasn't taken root or anything like that. So we're not talking about kotza, but as you do it, you dislodge the earth and move it. So both are examples of Tiltul and HaTzad, and Tosfos compares that to our sugya. Now this is very trivial. You want the knife to cut something with, or the flower to smell, it sounds like. So these are really trivial needs, and nonetheless, the Gemara Tosfos thinks this is comparable to our sugya of Tiltul and HaTzad. And so his answers, we're talking about something else that's going on over here. The issue is not Tiltul and HaTzad, it's that you're widening a hole in the wall or widening a hole in the ground, and that's the melachot going on. So that's Tosfos. But either way, I think you're correct that at least Tosfos doesn't think that thinks that you can compare all the examples of Tiltul and HaTzad, and doesn't go down the path of how much of a tzorech there is. Yeah. Okay, so that's just one point I want to put out there for when we learn the Gemara. I'll comment briefly also just because I'm interested in these things. Actually, I'll say one more on the Gemara before I go on to Tosfos. I have the same shaila really in the sorry, it's not the same shaila, but a related question, which is the Gemara says again that the Gemara's Havamina was that the machlokas Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish and the Tanakama about whether you can move the mace out of the fire to stop it getting cremated is a machlokas about Tiltul and HaTzad Shmei Tiltul or Shmei Tiltul. Is it a het of Muktza? The Gemara then says no. Everyone agrees that Tiltul and HaTzad is asa. Tiltul and HaTzad Shmei Tiltul, and the machlokas here is because of the unique circumstances. Odin Bohol, at a time of bereavement, people are uniquely and unusually stressed, and therefore, if you don't let him move the mace, they may come to put out the fire, which is terrible, which is a melachot on Shabbos. So better to soften the laws of Muktza and allow the person to move the mace out. Now, in truth, covered hameis and the destruction of the possibility of burying the dead body wouldn't supersede even Muktza on Shabbos, and Muktza would apply because Tiltul and HaTzad lo shmei Tiltul. Shmei Tiltul, but Tiltul and HaTzad is a movement of Muktza, and the heter is just because in the emotion of bereavement, it may end up being Mechal Shabbos. Now, so here I want to ask the same question in the Manda Omar that Tiltul and HaTzad Shmei Tiltul, and as Tiltul and HaTzad is forbidden, when Rabbi Yehuda ben Lakish allows one to move because of Adam Bahul, is that only in the case of Tiltul and HaTzad, or is that always? In other words, what's the heter of Adam Bahul? Is it that the whole of Muktza is waved away, is dismissed because of Adam Bahul, and therefore you can move the mace directly? Or even the man to Omar, who doesn't agree with the allowance of Tiltul and HaTzad, agrees that Tiltul and HaTzad is still a softer relationship to the Muktza, and therefore says this softer relationship to the Muktza I'm willing to waive because of Adam Bahul, because of the tension at the time, the stress at the time of bereavement and the risk of ending up being Mechal Shabbos. So all I want to bring out in the Gemara is maybe, again, a speculative thought, maybe the Manda Omar that disagrees with Tiltul and HaTzad also hears a svara to say it's a lesser form of Tiltul and only meant to allow Adam Bahul in a situation of Tiltul and HaTzad, but not direct Muktza. Now, this isn't a piece of speculation, because this is a genuine machlokas Rishonim. So again, I didn't give them Aaron Komer, so I will give them in time for Tuesday. There's a Rif, there's a Rabbi Yonah, there's a Ran, there's a Rosh, there's a whole series of Rishonim, and I'll give them on Tuesday. I'll give in advance of Tuesday. I'll give these Aaron Komers out for you to have a look at and work out this machlokas. But I just want to put it out there that when the Gemara says you can move Muktza because of Adam Bahul, doesn't mean to say all Muktza scenarios or only Tiltul and HaTzad, even though we're going in the opinion that holds Tiltul and HaTzad Shmei Tiltul, and it's also, nonetheless, maybe it's a softer form of Muktza, and therefore that's the one that we allow for Bahul. And again, I'll give out the Maram Komers for that on before Tuesday. Yeah.
It's not direct.
Yeah.
What is the trade-off in Purim here? You've got on one hand something like a five, which is probably a Darabana because you don't want the charcoal, and you've got dragging a Muktza object.
Yes.
How is it that one is preferable to the other?
Because melachot is treated more seriously, even though it may be a case of a melachot that's not the cover. Yeah, it's a melachot. Just give me okay, just one more signposting, which is because again I want to be able to send the Maram Komers for Tuesday, so I just want to direct you, which is that Tosfos goes through a number of scenarios and asks steers between all the sukkahs. Tosfos says that there's a chiluk between whether you're moving the Muktza for the sake of the Muktza, doing Tiltul and HaTzad for the sake of the Muktza, or Tiltul and HaTzad for the sake of something that's Mutter. So please, in advance of Shiur on Tuesday, chashman out very well the scenarios of Tosfos, because that is what we're going to focus on Tuesday, which is what is this chiluk between moving Muktza for something Mutter and moving Muktza for something else. And secondly, I'm going to focus on why is the chiluk, what's the logic of the chiluk, what's the svara to make that chiluk. That will be our focus on Tuesday. And I'll give you another number of Maram Komers that talk about what the reason for the distinction between moving Muktza, Tiltul and HaTzad to Zerach Muktza and the Zerach Tavah HaTzad. So it will be Tuesday, Shiur. Yeah, let me just turn this off.